Is she seriously going to play? She can't even see the keys, someone scoffed from the crowd as the blind girl sat quietly at the grand piano. But no one was prepared for what happened next. This is the extraordinary true story of Lena, a blind girl mocked for even daring to touch the school piano. But when she began to play, her music didn't just silence the bullies, it changed lives. What started with laughter ended in a standing ovation, and what began with mockery sparked a nationwide movement that would redefine what it means to see, to lead, and to heal through music. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. Why is she even walking up there? What's she gonna do? Tune it with her cane? The snide voice cracked through the murmurs like a whip, drawing a wave of muffled laughter across the back row of the dimly lit school auditorium. Whispers scurried from seat to seat, like rats hiding in the velvet shadows of the ancient red theater curtains. Someone chuckled loud enough to echo. Another mimicked piano notes in a mocking, clumsy rhythm. Plunk, plunk, plunk. But the girl in the center of it all said nothing. She kept walking, one deliberate step at a time, the white tip of her cane tapping rhythmically along the hardwood stage floor. Each tap sounded like a question hurled into the dark. Am I welcome here? Am I allowed? Do I belong? Lena didn't need to see the faces to feel them. She had long ago learned how to read the air. At 13, she knew exactly what silence laced with laughter meant. It wasn't admiration. It was the kind of quiet that stretches out before a cruel joke lands, a silence pregnant with malice and assumption. She could hear the curled lips, feel the crossed arms, the raised eyebrows, the weight of their disbelief pressed against her like invisible hands trying to shove her backward, back into obscurity. But Lena's fingers didn't tremble. Not yet. She reached the piano by feel, brushing its edge gently with the back of her hand, like one might greet an old friend or test the warmth of a long-forgotten memory. The bench creaked softly as she slid onto it. The auditorium lights glared down in harsh white streaks, brightening her silhouette to the onlookers, but all Lena saw was the same soft blur of shadows that shaped her entire world. Her hands hovered just above the keys. There was still time to run. Still time to walk away and pretend none of it ever happened. But her breath steadied. Her chest rose, then fell, then rose again, like the deep swell of a tide deciding to crash against a cliff instead of receding. She pressed a single note. Just one. The auditorium went dead silent. And then, let's rewind. Just a few weeks earlier, Lena had walked through these same auditorium doors for the first time, not as a performer, not even as a student of note, but as the new girl, the blind girl. In a school where talent wore mascara and reputations were as polished as the Steinway Grand on stage. Her mother had gripped her elbow tightly that morning, whispering words of encouragement Lena had half heard 100 times before. You're strong, baby. Remember, they don't have to see you for you to shine. But Lena already knew. This school was built for sight. Its hallways were lined with posters of student dancers mid-leap, violinists mid-bow, actors frozen in dramatic spotlights. Everything was about the look of brilliance. And Lena, petite, soft-spoken, with thick lenses that framed her milk-glass eyes, did not look like she belonged in any of it. By the end of the first week, her classmates had made up their minds. She was a novelty, an inconvenience, a charity case maybe. No one knew what she could do, but they all assumed what she couldn't. And that was enough. It was during lunch on a rainy Tuesday when Amanda and her entourage first really noticed her. Lena was sitting alone, her tray untouched, listening through a single earbud to a Chopin etude she had been trying to memorize. Her fingers moved subtly under the table, dancing over an invisible keyboard, playing the piece note by note in her head. Amanda tilted her head with faux curiosity and leaned in. "Hey, new girl," she said, sweet as venom. "You like piano or something?" Lena paused her recording. "Yes," she said quietly. Amanda's lips curled upward. "Cool. That's brave," she said, feigning sincerity. "I mean, I guess it's not about how you play, right? As long as you feel it or whatever." Her two sidekicks giggled. Lena nodded, unsure how to respond. The comment wasn't outright mean, but it left a sting, like a slap disguised as a pat on the shoulder. Amanda wasn't done. You should totally sign up for the talent show. It'd be iconic. The table laughed, and Lena, who had only ever performed for her grandfather and a few close neighbors, felt her stomach twist into knots. The next day, she did sign up, not to prove anything, not even for herself, but because she'd remembered the way Amanda's voice sounded. Light and poisonous, a tone Lena had heard before in other schools, from other mouths, always hiding behind politeness. And she'd heard something else too. Fear. Fear of being upstaged by someone who wasn't supposed to shine. That night, Lena practiced until her fingers blistered. She had no sheet music. She didn't need it. She had recordings. She had memory. She had the aching desire to turn all their laughter into stunned silence. By the third night, she didn't just play the piece. She embodied it. Her hands became breath. Her breath became rhythm. The music swelled through her veins like blood. Every missed note became a lesson. Every sour sound became a sharpening stone. She didn't want revenge. She wanted clarity, and that clarity carried her, heart first, to the stage on the night of the show. Which brings us back to Lena, sitting on the bench, fingers raised, breath held, the crowd whispering, Amanda watching, the lights humming, and Lena, with the entire weight of the room pressing down on her spine, pressing her fingers onto the first chord. Not in fear, but in defiance. The note rang out like a soft breath at midnight, gentle, almost timid, as if asking the room for permission to exist. No one moved. Lena's fingers hovered for a second longer, absorbing the vibration, feeling how the sound settled into her skin like rain soaking into soil. Then she pressed again, this time 3 notes, rolled delicately into a chord that sighed instead of shouted. The room remained frozen. The giggles were gone. The cruel eyes blinked, confused. Amanda tilted her head, arms crossed tighter, as if trying to hold on to her scorn. But Lena wasn't playing for them. She was playing for the echoes in her memory, the voice of her grandfather chuckling as she clumsily banged on the upright at 5 years old. The soft clink of his mug being set on the windowsill behind her. The first time he called her our little miracle in a minor key. She was playing for the mornings he sat beside her, hand over hers, teaching her what a C felt like, how an octave stretched across space like the span of a bridge, how sound could become architecture. She was playing for the silence that had followed after he passed, leaving her the piano, the vinyls, and the ghosts of melodies too beautiful to forget. As the intro built slowly, notes unraveling like ribbon, pacing themselves in quiet poise, something shifted in the air. The room, once brimming with mockery, began to inhale collectively and hold its breath. The stage lights reflected off the polished black lacquer of the grand piano, casting Lena's silhouette in a pool of gold. Her eyes, blind to the light, remained fixed somewhere far beyond the auditorium, her face serene, composed, untouched by the judgment in the crowd. Her left hand descended now, laying a deep resonance beneath the melody. Her right hand traced it with a gentler line, higher, wistful, like a child chasing a kite. The music wove through the air like thread, wrapping itself around the audience, silencing their thoughts, drawing their hearts to attention. Even Amanda's expression faltered. There was no stumble, no awkward pause, no clumsy fumbling in the dark, just precision, elegance, grace shaped by struggle. Amanda's smirk began to fade. She glanced at her friends who sat utterly still, their faces caught between awe and embarrassment. This wasn't a charity act, this was mastery, and they hadn't seen it coming. A teacher in the front row pressed her hand to her chest. Another leaned forward slightly, as if pulled by invisible string. The auditorium had become a cathedral. No one coughed, no one checked their phones. Even the creak of the air vents seemed to hush itself. And Lena began to soar. She reached the crescendo. Her fingers raced now, no longer tentative, but thunderous, full of urgency. The melody roared like ocean tide crashing against the shore of their assumptions. Her hair, neatly tied back, trembled with the motion of her body. Each strike of the keys was an affirmation. I belong here. I have something to say. I see more than you think I do. At the back of the auditorium, one of the stagehands paused mid-step, watching her as if seeing music for the first time. A freshman who had laughed the loudest when Lena first walked on stage now sat forward with wide, unblinking eyes. Even Sophie, Amanda's friend, who had always trailed along with the group's laughter but never led it, felt something heavy in her chest begin to shift. She remembered seeing Lena in the hallway once, standing alone, her fingers moving silently in the air, her expression full of something delicate and powerful. She hadn't said anything then. But now, her palms began to warm. She folded her arms, not in disdain, but because she didn't know what to do with the guilt. The piece curved toward its final phrases. Lena's expression deepened. She leaned in, not to see but to feel. Her shoulders rose, her back arched slightly, her head tilted as if she were listening for a secret only she could hear. The last notes cascaded like falling leaves, gentle, then fewer, then silence. The room did not move, not yet. It lingered in the final sound, reluctant to break the spell. And then the first clap. Sophie, then another, then another. A roaring wave of applause broke through the stillness, shattering the stunned silence like glass. It was not polite clapping. It was not obligation. It was thunder. People stood. Hands clapped overhead, feet stomped, the walls vibrated. It was a standing ovation so fierce it drowned out every sneer that had ever trailed Lena's name. Amanda didn't move. She sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, her pride retreating like a tide. She had expected a train wreck, a scene, a joke she could replay for weeks, but instead she had witnessed a storm, quiet, then furious, then cleansing. Lena stood slowly from the bench, bowing her head slightly, unsure where to look, though she didn't need to. She could feel it all. The heat of the lights, the energy swelling from the floorboards beneath her shoes, the raw, unfiltered respect pulsing toward her like a heartbeat. She didn't smile yet, not because she wasn't proud, but because she was still inside the music, still holding it like a snow globe that hadn't yet settled. Her cane waited beside her. She reached for it calmly, with practiced ease, and walked off stage with the same measured dignity she had arrived with. Each step deliberate, not hesitant, but sovereign. Backstage, a breathless teacher caught her by the hand. "Lena, that was not just performance," the woman said, her voice thick with awe. "That was art. That was everything." Lena only nodded. She didn't need to say what was already understood. As the crowd finally began to settle, murmurs of disbelief and admiration rippled through the rows. "Did you know she could do that?" "I mean, she's blind." She didn't even look scared. "She made me cry." In the dressing room, Lena finally allowed herself to exhale. Her fingers still tingled from the final chord. She didn't need a mirror to know her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly frizzed at the temples from the sweat and adrenaline. She didn't care. Her hands slid over the worn wooden table, finding the water bottle she had memorized the location of. There, in the quiet, she smiled. Not for the applause, but because she had heard her grandfather again, in every note. She had played for him, and for every version of herself that had ever sat quietly in a corner while the world doubted her. She unscrewed the cap, took a long sip, and waited for the silence to settle again. Because Lena knew now, she hadn't just broken their expectations. She had tuned the entire school to a new frequency. The hallway after the talent show felt entirely different, like the school itself had exhaled something heavy. Where once Lena's steps had echoed alone, sharp and hollow like raindrops in an empty cathedral, now there was a subtle murmur in the air. People were whispering, not laughing, not mocking, whispering, curious, uncertain, maybe even a little ashamed. Her cane tapped softly as she walked, her palm grazing the smooth ridges of the lockers for grounding, her mind still steeped in the music she'd left on stage. She hadn't opened her eyes, but the walls around her had seen enough, and they would not forget. Footsteps hurried behind her. "Lena?" She paused mid-step. It wasn't a voice she knew well, soft, feminine, nervous. She turned slightly toward the source, tilting her head just enough to show she was listening. "It's Sophie," the girl said, drawing closer, the sound of rubber soles squeaking faintly against the linoleum. From Amanda's group. Lena didn't speak. Sophie shifted her weight, guilt brushing the edges of her voice. What you did tonight, I don't have words. I don't think anyone does." Still, Lena stayed quiet. Sometimes silence is the most honest response. Sophie fumbled again. "Amanda told us you'd embarrass yourself. We all kind of believed her. We laughed. I laughed." Her voice cracked slightly. "But you didn't embarrass anyone. You humbled all of us." Lena let the words settle, not rejecting them but not rushing to absorb them either. After a long pause, she asked gently, "Why did you believe her?" The question wasn't accusatory, it wasn't cruel, it was honest, naked. disarming. Sophie's breath caught. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe because she always sounds so sure of herself. And I didn't want to be the one to stand out. Lena nodded, understanding more than Sophie could ever guess. You don't need sight to know when someone's afraid of standing alone, she said. The weight of that hung between them for a long, fragile second. I'm sorry, Sophie whispered. I mean that. And Lena, who had learned to live in a world that often looked past her, extended something rare and powerful. Forgiveness. Thank you, she said softly. Then she turned and continued walking toward the door that led outside, the wind pressing gently against the glass as if waiting for her. Outside, the night was quiet and cold. The moon was high and hidden behind a blanket of clouds. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it, how the air seemed to glow with possibility. Her mother was waiting in the car, engine running, music humming faintly through the speakers. As Lena opened the passenger door and slipped inside, her mother turned with wide, shimmering eyes. I could hear them, baby, she whispered. I couldn't see the stage from where I sat, but I could hear them, standing, clapping, crying. Lena smiled faintly and fastened her seatbelt. It felt like the room changed shape, she said, like I could breathe inside it again. Her mother reached over, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's temple. You didn't just play the piano, she said, her voice thick with pride. You rewrote the story. They rode home in a quiet sort of joy, not loud, not celebratory, but sacred, like the hush after a prayer. Later that night, alone in her room, Lena sat at the old keyboard in the corner. The keys were slightly off pitch, the plastic chipped at the edges, but it didn't matter. She ran her fingers gently over them, as if thanking each note for lending its power. Then she pressed record on the small handheld device beside her. A new composition. Not for competition. Not for applause. But for the girl she used to be, the one who had stood outside music store windows and imagined being allowed inside. For the girl who had almost believed the laughter. For the girl who now knew that even blind eyes could ignite a spotlight when backed by enough soul. She played softly into the night, the house quiet except for the low pulse of melody. The next morning came like any other, with the clatter of breakfast dishes and the rustle of backpacks. But Lena sensed it before her shoes even touched the front steps of the school. Something was different. Whispers again, but not mocking. This time it was awe. She's the girl from last night. That was her? Did you see the way she moved? Like she could see every note. In the music wing, her name was suddenly spoken with reverence. The practice rooms buzzed with retellings. Teachers glanced at her in the hallways with knowing eyes. Even the school's headmaster mentioned her performance during the morning announcements, calling it a reminder that true artistry transcends perception. But not everyone clapped. Amanda didn't speak to her, didn't look at her. She and her friends stood off to the side, silent, stiff, like sculptures no longer admired. Her performance had pulled focus away from them. And Amanda, always the center of attention, now sat dimmed in Lena's reflected light. Lena didn't seek her out. She didn't need to. She had already said what needed saying, without words. Instead, she went to the music room and sat at the same grand piano, this time during lunch, this time in front of students who didn't laugh but waited quietly as she played. Not a showpiece, not a spectacle, but a slow, warm lullaby she had written for no reason other than it felt beautiful in her hands. That's when Mrs. Hallberg stepped in. She had watched Lena from the shadows the night before. Her arms crossed tightly, her heart beating double time. Now she approached gently, notebook in hand. Lena, do you have a minute? The girl stopped playing, turning slightly toward the voice. Yes, ma'am. I'd like to talk to you about something, the teacher said, her tone unusually formal. There's a statewide performing arts showcase next month. We're allowed to submit one student to represent our school. Usually, it's someone from the senior class. Lena waited. Mrs. Hallberg took a breath. But after last night, several of us believe you're the best choice. We'd be honored if you'd accept. Lena blinked slowly. I'd be the only freshman, she said. Mrs. Hallberg smiled. You'd be the only you. A pause. Then, yes, I'd like that. The teacher reached out and clasped her hand, not as a guide, not as a helper, but as a colleague. An equal. That night, when Lena returned home and told her mother, they sat in silence for a long time, their hands clasped tightly over the kitchen table. tears unspoken but deeply understood. And in her heart, Lena made a vow to never again let the world define her limits, to trust her hands, to trust her ears, to let music speak where sight could not. The state showcase announcement hit the school like thunder on a clear day. A poster appeared on the music wing bulletin board by sunrise, white parchment with deep blue lettering, sharp and formal. It read, "Congratulations to Lena Hart, selected performer for the State Youth Arts Showcase." Below it, a photo someone had taken from the wings the night of the talent show. Lena at the piano, caught mid-performance, her head tilted ever so slightly, her hands suspended above the keys like a prayer. Though she could not see the image, others could, and they stared at it with something closer to reverence than curiosity. For the first time in the school's memory, the selected representative was not just the youngest contender, but blind. Some students murmured admiration, others disbelief. A few said nothing at all, their silence a crumbling defense against what they had once mocked. But the name, Lena Hart, was now stitched into the school's fabric like gold thread running through a plain cloth. And Amanda hated it. She stood before the bulletin board, jaw tight, hands clenched beneath her designer jacket sleeves. Her reflection glared faintly in the glass that covered the announcement. It wasn't fair. She had spent 3 years perfecting performances, managing image, rehearsing charisma, and then this quiet, cane-tapping girl from nowhere floated in and cracked the school open with a single song. But beneath Amanda's bitterness was something she couldn't name, something that stung behind her eyes and fluttered beneath her ribs, because deep down, even she knew what she'd witnessed that night had not been an accident. It had been brilliance. And brilliance, no matter who delivered it, demanded recognition. While whispers surged around the hallways, Lena remained a calm center in the storm. She didn't boast, she didn't preen. She didn't walk any differently than before, though now each step seemed to echo with a deeper sense of gravity, as if the floor itself had shifted to meet her. She practiced quietly, often alone, in the hours before dawn or after the final bell, when the halls grew empty and the sunlight slanted in through high windows like soft applause. She carried no sheet music, just memory, just sound, just trust. Mrs. Halberd became her silent anchor. She never hovered or patronized. She simply unlocked the doors early, kept the room warm, and let Lena explore. "You don't need to prove anything at this showcase," she told her one morning, her voice calm, level. "You already did, now you just play. Show them what it means when music comes from somewhere deeper than applause." Lena nodded slowly. "I want them to hear what I see." The teacher paused. "What do you see?" Lena smiled faintly, almost shyly. "Possibility, colors. Even though I've never seen them with my eyes, I know them. Music paints them for me." That night in her bedroom, Lena recorded something different. Not a rehearsal, not a classical piece, but something original. She called it Sightless Light. It began with a low, haunting rhythm, steady as footsteps through fog. Then came soft trills like sun breaking through clouds, followed by a delicate melody that floated higher and higher, spiraling like smoke into a sky she'd never seen but somehow understood. Her mother sat outside the door, a mug of tea cooling in her palms, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. She didn't interrupt, she didn't speak, she just listened. The showcase arrived on the first Saturday of spring. Trees outside the performance hall were just beginning to bloom, their blossoms trembling in the breeze like shy applause. Lena stood backstage, dressed in midnight blue. She didn't wear anything flashy, no glitter or sequins, just soft velvet and a small silver locket tucked close to her heart, a gift from her grandfather, engraved with a single word, "Listen." The hall was packed. Parents, judges, scouts from conservatories, even a few local journalists. Most of the performers were older, gliding in with practiced grace, hands shaking slightly with nerves or ambition. Some eyed Lena with polite confusion. Others offered soft smiles. One girl, tall, elegant, with a cello strapped to her back, paused beside her and said, "You're the blind pianist, right?" Lena nodded. "I saw the video from your school," she said. "It gave me chills. Break a leg out there." Lena smiled. "I'll try not to." Backstage, she waited as performer after performer took the stage. Jazz duos, opera singers, a flamenco guitarist who played with his eyes closed and fingers aflame, then her name, clear, crisp, now performing an original composition on piano, Lena Hart. The room dimmed. She stepped forward, cane clicking once against the polished floor, then again, then once more as she reached the bench. A handler quietly guided her hand to the side of the piano, then stepped away. Silence fell. Not the nervous kind. The sacred kind. Lena took one long breath, then another, and she began. The first notes of sightless light curled through the hall like candle smoke, delicate, winding, uncertain. The melody took its time, building piece by piece until it bloomed wide and full in the center of the room, like a flower opening under moonlight. Her hands moved with practiced intuition, not striking the keys but coaxing them, each note drawn out like a thread from her soul. The audience did not cough, they did not shift. Even the children in the crowd fell still, spellbound. Somewhere near the back, a scout from Juilliard leaned forward in his seat, pen forgotten in hand. Beside him, a woman gripped her program to her chest and whispered, "She's playing in pictures." Lena played the storm and the sun after it. She played hope. She played memory. She played what it felt like to be unseen, but to see everything with your heart. When the final note fell into silence, there was no instant applause, just stillness, like the room didn't want the song to end. Then someone stood, a second, a third. The wave began again, not polite this time, rising, roaring, a standing ovation not just of admiration, but surrender. They had come expecting performance. They left having felt something. Lena stood slowly, bowed toward the sound, and allowed herself the smallest smile, not for their cheers, but for the hush that came after. That sacred silence, the one that only follows truth. They say applause fades fast, that the sound dies once the clapping stops. But some echoes don't belong to the air. They belong to the soul. And Lena carried that silence with her, that perfect hush after the final note, like a secret held between heartbeats. It followed her back through the velvet curtains and into the narrow backstage hallway, where it lived inside the smile on the stagehand's face, in the glimmer behind her music teacher's eyes, and in the gentle way her mother reached to hold her hand without saying a word. She didn't need to see the audience's standing ovation. She'd felt it, rising from the floor through the petals beneath her shoes, humming in her fingertips, washing over her skin like the warmth of the sun. The showcase officials gave her a certificate, a glass plaque with her name engraved on it, and a soft-spoken invitation. If she wished, she could audition early for several elite conservatories next season, skipping 2 full years of competition. But Lena didn't cling to the offers or the praise. She nodded graciously, thanked them, and tucked the paper carefully into her bag like a page from someone else's story, because her story had never been about trophies. It was about sound, about truth, about becoming. Back at school, her return was less like a triumphal parade and more like the ripple that follows a stone dropped into still water, quiet, deep, and wide. No more whispers trailed her in the hallways. No more stifled laughter or staged pity. Instead, she heard her name spoken like a gentle breeze drifting through an open window. She passed groups of students who had once smirked at the sound of her cane. Now, those same feet paused when she walked by. Some nodded. Some said, "Hi." Some, still unsure of how to carry their shame, looked down with flushed cheeks. But Lena didn't need apologies. She wasn't chasing approval. She was chasing light. One afternoon, as she practiced in the music room, the door creaked open behind her. She didn't stop playing. The piece she was working on, Debussy's Clair de Lune, glimmered faintly in the still air, like water catching moonlight. Then a voice, not timid, not sarcastic, tired. "Lena, Amanda." Lena didn't turn around. Her fingers slowed, letting the melody fade like mist. "I figured you'd be here," Amanda said. Her voice was strained, like someone trying to force a smile through cracked glass. Lena listened without speaking. "I owe you something," Amanda added after a long silence. "Or maybe I owe myself the decency to say it aloud. I was horrible to you." Still, Lena didn't reply. Amanda continued. "When you first came here, I thought you were going to make everything complicated. You didn't fit the mold, and that scared me. So I made you small, or I tried to. But then I saw what you did on that stage, and I realized I was the one who was blind." That word lingered awkwardly in the air. Blind. Lena turned then, just enough to face her, not with anger, not with pity, but with a quiet, searching presence that made Amanda fidget. "There's more than one kind of blindness," Lena said softly. "Yours was fear. Mine just taught me to listen better." Amanda lowered her eyes, nodding slowly. You're not just good, you're breathtaking. I hated that at first, but now I wish I'd listened sooner. Lena nodded once. Now you are. They didn't speak again. Amanda left. But something changed in her after that. Her laughter softened. Her gaze lingered more thoughtfully. She didn't try to become Lena's friend, not immediately, but she began watching instead of mocking. And sometimes she clapped the loudest when Lena performed at school recitals. As spring melted into summer, invitations began to arrive in thick white envelopes, private performances, guest recitals, even a short feature in a music journal written by a blind composer in her 70s who called Lena the sound of tomorrow. But Lena didn't let the future pull her too far ahead. She still woke up early. She still played in the quiet of morning. And some days, when the house was still and the birds hadn't begun their chorus, she would sit by her window, press her fingers lightly against the pane, and listen, not to music, but to the world. To the wind bending the trees, to the hum of faraway traffic, to her mother humming in the kitchen, to life unscripted. That summer, one of the conservatories sent a special request, an opportunity to perform on a televised segment called Young Masters of Music, broadcast nationally. Lena hesitated. Television wasn't her stage, sound was. But when she learned that the segment would also feature stories of underrepresented musicians, including a violinist who played with one arm and a singer with a speech impediment, she agreed, not to be seen, but to stand beside others who had been overlooked. The day of filming, the studio lights were blinding, though Lena felt them more as heat than glare. The host tried to overcompensate, using an exaggeratedly gentle voice, as if every question might bruise her. But Lena held her own. When asked how she learned to play without sight, she replied, "I don't play without sight, I just see differently." When asked what music meant to her, she answered, "It's the one place I've never been underestimated." Her segment aired on a quiet Sunday evening. By Monday morning, the school's voicemail inbox was full. Emails flooded in. People from across the country wrote letters, blind children who now wanted to try piano, retired music teachers who wept while watching. Even a woman who admitted she had told her own daughter to quit music because of her disability and now regretted it. Lena read every letter aloud to her mother, the two of them sitting by the window, the morning sun warming their faces. One letter stood out. It was from a boy named Caleb. He wrote, "I'm 12 and I can't see either. I didn't think I could ever be good at anything until I heard you play. Now I want to try. I don't know if I'll ever be great like you, but I'm not scared anymore." Lena folded the letter carefully, placing it beside her grandfather's locket. It had never been about showing the world what she could do. It was about reminding others what they could. The piano keys felt cooler than usual that morning. Lena's fingertips paused on middle C, hovering like a breath before a question. The old upright in her living room, slightly out of tune in the upper octaves, sang differently than the Steinway at school. It didn't shine or project or impress. It remembered. Each note was steeped in years of sunlit afternoons and forgotten tears, of her grandfather's quiet humming and her mother's late-night sighs. This piano knew her not as a performer, but as a little girl who once needed to be lifted onto the bench. She played slowly, not to practice, not to prepare, but to return. Return to the place before all the noise, the applause, the stage lights, the interviews and expectations. She needed silence wrapped in sound, a space where her heart could stretch without watching eyes. And so she played the melody she had first written for herself. Before the showcase, before the school believed in her, before Sophie apologized and Amanda's name stopped meaning something bitter. The song had no title, only feeling, and it bloomed like a candle inside her chest. Halfway through, her mother peeked in, holding a cup of tea, lingering in the doorway. She didn't speak. She rarely did when Lena played at home now. There was a reverence between them, something deeper than words, like the way a garden knows the sun without having to look at it. When Lena stopped, her hands resting gently on the wood, her mother stepped forward. "You okay, baby?" Lena nodded. "Just quiet today." Her mother set the tea down beside her. "You've been everywhere lately. Papers, online, even Mrs. Dorsey from the grocery store said she saw you on the evening news." Lena smiled. "You're allowed to rest, you know," her mother added gently. You don't have to be the world's miracle every second. I'm not trying to be a miracle, Lena said softly. I'm just trying to stay close to the music. All the other stuff, it's loud. Her mother wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pressing her lips to her daughter's temple. Then stay here for a while, let the rest chase you. Later that day, a letter arrived, one unlike the others. Handwritten in faded blue ink, the paper soft at the corners. No return address, no branding, just her name. Inside was a single page. Lena, I heard you through a friend who sent me a recording. I haven't cried at music in years, not because I didn't try, but because I didn't feel anything. What you played reminded me why I became a composer. Thank you. If you ever want to collaborate, I would be honored. Below the signature, in tiny print, was a postscript. P.S. I've been blind since I was 19. I hear everything now. Lena held the letter to her chest for a long time, letting its warmth fill the corners where doubt sometimes still lingered. She knew the name, Eleanor Denton, an acclaimed composer who hadn't released anything new in over a decade. Her music was studied in conservatories across the country. For someone like that to write, it felt unreal. Yet Lena didn't feel small. She felt seen, in the most honest way. Not as a prodigy, not as a headline, but as an artist. Weeks passed. She declined a magazine interview, said no to a brand endorsement asking her to promote music-themed backpacks with her face on them. She didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted to be a student, a musician, a soul with hands. But she did say yes to one thing. The elementary school across town where her cousin attended invited her to speak to the students. It wasn't televised, no red carpets. Just folding chairs and wide-eyed kids with open notebooks and orange juice cartons beside their feet. She entered the room quietly, cane tapping gently against the linoleum, her satchel slung over one shoulder, a small keyboard in her hand. The children leaned forward like flowers turning toward sound. She didn't prepare a speech. She didn't need one. I'm Lena, she said simply. I play piano, and I don't see with my eyes, but I see with music. A small girl raised her hand. Is it scary to go on stage when you can't see anyone? Lena smiled. No, because I can feel the room. I hear your breathing, your feet tapping, your heart's beating a little faster. That tells me everything I need. Another boy asked, what do colors look like to you? Lena pressed a key on the small keyboard. Bright, high. Yellow sounds like this. Then she pressed a lower, smoother chord. Blue is soft like that. They were mesmerized. One child at the end came up and whispered, I get scared when people look at me too, but when you talk, it's like I don't have to be scared anymore. Lena knelt, touching the child's hand gently. Then don't be, you're already enough. When she left, the teacher hugged her tightly. That was something they'll never forget. Lena nodded. Me neither. Back home, as the sky turned amber behind her bedroom window, Lena sat at her piano and began to write again. Not for a stage, not for applause, but for the little girl in the front row who needed a sound to chase away fear. A new piece. Gentle, curious, and brave. She called it First Light. And in its quiet rise, she poured everything she'd once been afraid to share. The loneliness, the laughter she'd endured, the aching hush before her fingers found their voice. She played until stars touched the sky, and in the dark, her light kept growing. The hallway was too quiet for a Monday morning. Not the kind of quiet that meant peace, but the kind that pressed against the walls like an approaching storm. Lena sensed it before she even reached her locker. The rhythm of movement was off. Footsteps were slower, voices more hushed. Her cane tapped once, twice, then paused as she tilted her head slightly, listening. Sophie's voice broke the tension first. Lena, hey, do you have a second? Something in the way she said it made Lena nod before even asking why. Sophie's breath caught like she was about to run, but chose to stand still instead. She stepped closer, her sneakers making a soft rubbery squeak against the floor. There's something going on, she said. You should know before you hear it from someone else. Lena didn't move. She just waited. They found a clip, Sophie continued, lowering her voice. An old one. Someone from another school posted it. It's from months ago. You were in the music room, and Amanda and some of the others were laughing at you. It was before the talent show. You were playing, and someone filmed it without you knowing. They added a caption. It said, she hesitated. It said, blind girl bangs on piano like it's a toy. Lena didn't flinch. but inside, something went still. They posted it last night, Sophie said. It's getting views, a lot, and people are starting to share it without knowing who you really are. The clip was less than 30 seconds long. Grainy, handheld, badly lit. Lena, sitting alone at the piano in the school's music room, playing a gentle phrase over and over, working through it, her head tilted, unaware of the phone trained on her. The caption made her look foolish. Helpless. Like she was just poking at keys for fun. There was no sound from Amanda or the others in the video, but their laughter had echoed in real life. Now it echoed again, digitally, soullessly, from people who didn't know her story, who didn't care to ask. Strangers with usernames and empty profile pictures were commenting things like, "She's brave, but lol, she should stick to basics." Trying to go viral by being blind, huh? LMAO, this ain't music. Lena didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain was familiar. It had a shape, a texture, and she knew how to hold it now without letting it crush her. At lunch, she sat alone, not because no one wanted to sit with her, but because she needed to hear herself think. The cafeteria buzzed softly, forks tapping plastic trays, students murmuring under their breath. She heard her name once, then twice. Then in a voice that didn't think she could hear. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers intertwined tightly. She had told herself that she was past this, that she had earned their respect, that the stage had silenced the cruel voices. But fame, if you could call it that, had simply amplified the echo. Mrs. Hallberg found her after school. Her tone was careful, laced with something like fury, wearing a mask of calm. "We're reporting it," she said. "I already sent an email to the administrators and to the other school. This was targeted, cruel, illegal, frankly. You don't have to see the video, you don't have to respond." Lena shook her head slowly. "I've seen it." Hallberg's voice softened. "Then I'm so sorry." Lena turned her face toward her teacher. "It's not the video that hurts. It's that someone thought I was nothing but that moment. They didn't even care what I was playing. They just saw the blindness, not the music." That night, she sat at the piano without playing. The keys were quiet beneath her fingers, like a friend who knows better than to offer empty words. Her breath stayed shallow, her shoulders drawn in. She could feel the weight of it all, the eyes, the judgment, the ache of having one's art reduced to a punchline. Her mother sat nearby, reading in silence, but Lena knew she felt it too. The heaviness in the room was shared. Finally, Lena whispered, "Should I say something?" Her mother looked up. "Do you want to?" "I don't know," she answered. "Part of me wants to ignore it, like it doesn't matter, but another part wants to speak, not for me, for the next girl. The next kid they decide to mock because she's different." Her mother nodded slowly. "Then speak. But speak your way." Lena opened her laptop. The keys clicked under her hands like a metronome counting down to something important. She didn't write a defense, or a rant, or a clever caption. She just told the truth. In a single paragraph, she posted, "A video of me was posted without my permission. I was practicing a piece I wrote, trying to get it right. Not performing, just learning. I've been blind since birth, but music has always been my way of seeing the world. That clip doesn't show the full song, or my story, but it shows me doing what I love, even when no one was clapping. And I'll never apologize for that." She attached a new recording. The full version of the song she had been playing in the video. A piece she had once called Unfinished. Now, it had a new name. Even When They Laugh. She uploaded it with her post and closed her laptop. By morning, it had over 100,000 views. But this time, the comments sounded different. "I'm in tears. The beauty in this is undeniable. Watched the original video and was disgusted. Then I listened to this. That's not just music, that's soul. I used to teach piano. This girl plays like she's writing a love letter to the world. Lena, don't stop, ever." Even Eleanor Denton commented, "They clipped your wings in the first video, but this one you flew." The school called an assembly that Friday. A formal apology was issued. The students involved were suspended. Amanda, surprisingly, stood at the microphone and spoke. She didn't deny it, didn't deflect. She just said, "We were wrong, and Lena showed us who she really was. Not by clapping back, but by creating something beautiful in the face of something ugly. I only hope I learn to do the same." Lena sat in the front row, not smiling, not gloating, just steady. She wasn't there for revenge. She was there because the music was bigger than all of it. And when the assembly ended, dozens of students came up to her. Not with fanfare, not with awkward praise, but with something simpler. Respect. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the music wing, casting long lines of gold across the floorboards. Lena arrived early, as she always did, her cane tapping a familiar pattern against the polished wood. The hallway was quiet, restful, even after the storm of last week's assembly. No more whispers, no more stifled giggles. Instead, a gentle stillness. Like the world had exhaled and was ready to listen. She made her way to the grand piano at the end of the corridor, where sunlight pooled in ripples across the black lacquer. Today she had no assignments, no upcoming performances, just the promise of unscripted time, a gift after the chaos. She rested her palm on the cool surface of the closed lid as if greeting an old friend, then lifted it to sit on the bench. She folded her cane neatly beside her and closed her eyes, breathing in the hush. A door opened behind her, and she heard the soft soles of gym shoes. Sophie stepped forward, clutching a music manuscript in pale hands. Her expression was earnest, unguarded, painted with something like hope. "Lena," Sophie said, voice low, "I know you're not a teacher, but would you mind looking at this? I tried arranging first light for violin. I thought maybe you'd like to check it." Lena nodded, turning her head slightly to receive the paper. Sophie held it out carefully, her fingertips brushing Lena's hand in a fleeting spark of warmth. When she drew back, Lena felt the tremor of new beginnings coursing through the space between them. She lifted the pages to the light, feeling the raised ink of the notation as if it were a braille map. Her fingers traced the staff lines, the notes, delicate curves that sang only when understood. She tapped a finger against a passage, lifting her head. "This part here," she said gently. "It needs just a touch more space. Let the notes breathe before the rise." Sophie exhaled, relief and gratitude mingling in her tone. "Thank you, I want to do this right." Her shoulders relaxed. "For you, for the music." They worked side by side, Lena guiding Sophie's bow strokes with careful description, teaching her how to shape each phrase, where to draw a whisper, where to anchor a heartbeat. No laughter intruded, no performance jitters. Just two souls sharing their language, the same words spoken in different tongues. When they finished, Lena closed her eyes again and let the silence settle. "It's beautiful," she said. "You made it yours." Sophie smiled, and Lena sensed a shift beneath the surface, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. Later that afternoon, Lena returned to her room to find the letter from Eleanor Denton waiting on her desk. The envelope was thick, the handwriting confident. She opened it to read, "Lena, your generosity in mentoring Sophie reminds me of my own teacher, long gone now. I would like to offer you a commission, a duet for piano and violin to premiere at my annual concert in New York. No strings attached, just an invitation to share your gifts with the world." Lena's breath caught, a duet, her melody entwined with another voice. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to the quiet afternoons with Sophie. The thought of collaboration sent a warmth through her chest, a blossoming of possibility. She touched the paper to her heart and whispered, "Yes." That evening, she sat at her upright piano, the same one that had birthed First Light, and began to craft the opening bars of the new duet. The piano spoke in low, pulsing chords, steady footsteps through darkness, while the higher register trilled with anticipation. In her mind, she heard a violin entering, a thread weaving through the piano's foundation like a sunbeam piercing fog. Outside, summer cicadas droned their song, but inside, Lena's world was music alone. She lost track of time, her fingers dancing across the worn keys as if possessed by a vision no one else could see. When at last she paused, the page before her was filled with notes that felt alive, breathing, trembling, poised to bloom. A gentle knock on the door startled her. Her mother entered, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She placed one beside Lena without a word, then sat on the edge of the bed, watching her daughter with unspoken pride. In that moment, Lena realized how far she had come. From a girl who tiptoed to the piano bench amid laughter, to a composer whose music was sought by a legend. She sipped the tea, the warmth spreading through her. Then she looked at her hands and thought of all the journeys they'd taken. Through names scrawled on locker doors, over piano keys, across the strings of a violin. They had learned to speak truth in sound, to carve paths through doubt and fear. School resumed in autumn, and Lena found herself navigating hallways, not with the hush of tension, but with the ease of belonging. Younger students waved hello, teachers greeted her by name and asked after her composition. Even Amanda offered a nod in the corridor, a gesture simple but sincere. The world had shifted around Lena, bending toward the light she carried. One crisp morning, Mrs. C. Hallberg beckoned Lena to the music wing office. There, on the polished oak desk, lay a violin and a bow, loaned by the school for the new duet's first rehearsal. Lena traced the instrument's curve with her fingertips, feeling the swell of sound waiting beneath the varnish. "She said she'll send her concertmaster to New York," Mrs. Hallberg explained, voice soft with excitement. "But here, you'll play with Sophie." Lena closed her eyes at the thought. Sophie, once the girl who had giggled at her, now the one who would share the stage in duet. She smiled softly. "I'd be honored." Their first rehearsal was held late one afternoon after classes ended. The practice room was small and bare, acoustic panels lining the walls, a single overhead light casting cool illumination. Sophie arrived with her violin case, her face a blend of nerves and exhilaration. Lena sat at the piano, touched the first key gently, and waited. Sophie tuned her instrument, the pegs turning with soft clicks until the strings sang true. She approached the bench, nodding in greeting, and lifted her violin to her shoulder. Lena counted silently, 1, 2, 3, then began. The piano's low opening measured time like a heartbeat. Sophie entered on the fourth count, her bow gliding across strings to weave the melody that danced above Lena's chords. They played in careful balance, piano firm, violin lyrical, as if two voices were whispering secrets to one another. In the stillness between movements, Lena sensed Sophie's trembling. She smiled and nodded, encouragement without words. Sophie took a deep breath and launched into the next phrase with renewed confidence. The notes flew, bright, hopeful, tender, and their music filled the room. When they reached the final measure, they ended in perfect unison, the last chord held long enough for the echoes to fade into memory. Neither spoke, only the hum of two souls joined in creation, the air vibrating with promise. Weeks later, Lena traveled to New York with her mother. The concert hall was vast, rows of seats stretching into darkness, a proscenium arch framing the stage like a portal. She felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but also a deep-rooted calm. She was no longer a girl practicing in solitude. She was an artist stepping into her own light. Backstage, the violinist from Eleanor Denton's ensemble greeted her. He was seasoned, his fingers calloused, his posture regal. Yet when he introduced himself, his voice carried a gentle warmth. "It's an honor to play your piece." Lena nodded, fingertips brushing her score. "Thank you," she whispered. On stage, the lights shifted, and Lena and the concertmaster faced each other across the piano. A hush rippled through the audience. Lena closed her eyes, counted silently, and began. The duet unfolded, piano and violin in dialogue, a conversation of hope, remembrance, and quiet triumph. When the final notes trembled into silence, the hall erupted in applause so thunderous it shook the stage. Lena opened her eyes, stunned by the roar. She glanced at the concertmaster, who offered a respectful nod, then turned to the audience and bowed deeply. The music had traveled further than she ever imagined, carrying her message across oceans of sound. Backstage, after the curtain call, Eleanor Denton appeared, leaning on a cane. Her eyes glistened. "You have done more than I ever dreamed," she said. "You've reminded me why I compose." Lena pressed the locket at her neck and smiled. "We see differently," she replied, "but that only makes our vision stronger." That night, as Lena and her mother walked through the quiet streets of Manhattan, the city lights blinking like stars, Lena realized that her world had expanded far beyond the school piano. She had turned cruelty into compassion, mockery into music, and darkness into possibility. And she knew that as long as she dared to listen, to herself, to others, to the fragile silences between notes, her story would continue to unfold in melodies yet unsung. The train ride home felt like a dream suspended in motion. The low hum of the tracks beneath the wheels, the muffled chatter of passengers, the soft breeze slipping through the cracked window, it all blended into a symphony of stillness. Lena sat beside her mother in the quiet corner of the carriage, fingers resting lightly on the top of her travel case, her locket tucked beneath her shirt like a heartbeat pressed to skin. She hadn't said much since the New York performance. She didn't need to. The music had already spoken everything that words could never contain. Her mother held a book on her lap, but hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. She kept glancing at Lena's face, studying it like a melody she didn't want to interrupt. And Lena, lost in thought, traced invisible notes into her palm, her mind replaying the duet, how the violin had sung with her, not over her, not in competition, but as a voice woven into her own. She could still feel the final chord trembling beneath her skin. That night, back in her room, Lena didn't rush to the piano. She sat on the floor beside it, silent, unmoving, as if waiting for something she couldn't name to arrive. She could hear the familiar creaks of the house settling, the distant sounds of a television murmuring downstairs, the rustle of leaves outside her window. All of it was ordinary, beautiful in its own way. But a question had begun to stir in her, a quiet, aching question that only surfaced when the applause was gone. What now? She had played for the school. She had stood on the stage in New York. She had silenced critics, forgiven bullies, inspired strangers. But where did the path go next? She wasn't hungry for fame. She wasn't chasing lights or cameras. She wanted something deeper, something truer, something that would last longer than a headline or a standing ovation. That's when she remembered Caleb, the boy who had written to her after the talent show, the boy who was 12, blind, afraid. She had tucked his letter into the drawer beside her bed, just under her grandfather's locket. She pulled it out again, running her fingers over the raised lines of his careful handwriting. Now I want to try. I don't know if I'll ever be great like you, but I'm not scared anymore. She closed her eyes. No, she didn't want to chase stages. She wanted to build bridges. 2 days later, she asked Mrs. Hallberg if she could start a music circle for blind and visually impaired kids in the community. A space where they could play without fear, without judgment, without performance. A space to just feel the joy of music beneath their fingers. Hallberg said yes, not just yes, but with tears in her eyes and her full support behind it. Within 2 weeks, the first Saturday session was arranged. The school donated a few old keyboards. The local music shop offered discounted tuning and repairs, and Sophie volunteered to help with string instruments and guiding the children to their seats. On that first day, 5 children arrived. 5 tiny miracles, each one with a cane, a parent, and a quiet look of uncertainty in their eyes. Lena greeted them one by one. She didn't give them rules. She gave them space. Touch the keys. See what they feel like, she said. There's no right or wrong, just sound. A girl named Jaya pressed a single note and giggled. A boy named Mateo leaned his head to the side, listening to the vibrations. Lena knelt beside them, teaching them how to find middle C, how to stretch their fingers like wings across the octaves, how to trust their ears instead of their eyes. Sophie sat beside a young boy named Isaiah and guided his hand across her violin's neck. It's like singing, she said. The bow is your breath. By the end of the hour, the room had filled with the soft chaos of discovery. Notes overlapping, rhythms stumbling, melodies half-born and entirely imperfect. But to Lena, it was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. At the end of the session, Jaya ran up and hugged her. I want to be like you when I grow up, she said. Lena knelt, pressing her forehead gently to the girl's. No, she whispered. Be like you. I just want to hear what your music sounds like. Word spread quickly. By the second week, there were 10 students. By the third, 20. The circle grew, slowly, organically, like a song written without sheet music. Parents brought snacks. Volunteers donated time. Even Amanda stopped by once, shy and awkward but genuine. I could help run the door, she said, or organize supplies. Lena nodded. That'd be great. No sarcasm, no pride, just people meeting in the space music had made possible. One afternoon, Caleb arrived. His mother stood in the doorway, clutching his backpack. He begged to come, she said, her voice shaking. He's never been to anything like this. I don't know if he'll... But Caleb had already slipped past her, following the sound of the piano. He found Lena by the keyboard and touched her elbow gently. I'm here, he whispered. Lena smiled. Welcome. He sat beside her, hands trembling. She placed his fingers over the keys, and together they began. Not with a masterpiece, not with anything polished, just with middle C. And then another note, and another. Until Caleb, eyes closed, leaned forward and smiled. It was small, but it was everything. After the session, Lena sat alone in the music room long after the others had gone. The light was soft, the air still. Her hands rested on her lap, her heart full. This quiet revolution was what she had been searching for. Not applause, but connection. Not legacy, but presence. She lifted the lid of the piano again, pressing one key, a single note, then a slow chord. She let it ring into the silence, then whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "This is the music I was meant to play." The auditorium had never been this full, not even for graduation. Not even when the school had once hosted a famous Broadway actor for a fundraiser. But tonight, the seats were filled. Students, teachers, parents, neighbors, strangers. Some had come from the next town over. Some had come from the next state. And every single person in the crowd had come for the same reason. Lena? No posters had advertised it. No marketing push. Just whispers. Just hearts that carried the story from one hand to another like a secret that wanted to be shared. And now the room was humming with expectation, with reverence, with the quiet kind of electricity that can only come before something sacred begins. Backstage, Lena stood in silence. She wore no glittering dress, no spotlight begged for her. She wore simple black, her hair pulled back in a soft twist. Around her neck, the locket still hung, the one that had carried her grandfather's quiet legacy like a compass pressed to her skin. Beside her stood Sophie, holding her violin. She'd grown since that first rehearsal. Not taller, though maybe that too, but steadier. Her eyes no longer shifted to others for approval. She carried herself with purpose now. Not because she was standing beside Lena, but because she'd found her own voice through the music they shared. On Lena's other side was Caleb, just 12, fingers twitching nervously over his knees. His shoes barely touched the floor as he sat at the bench reserved for a small duet in the second act. But his posture was proud. He wore a little blue vest and a single white glove on his left hand, just like his favorite classical pianist once wore in a photo he kept folded in his backpack. Lena reached down and squeezed his shoulder gently. "You ready?" He nodded, throat too tight to speak. But he was. The lights dimmed. A hush washed over the crowd like a tide pulling back before a wave. The curtain lifted, and Lena stepped forward. She did not speak. She didn't introduce herself. She simply walked to the piano, placed her cane gently to the side, and sat. She let her hands hover above the keys for a moment, just long enough for the crowd to remember she couldn't see them. And then she began. The piece started with a low hum, 3 notes, spaced like footsteps echoing in an empty hallway. Then a lift, a glimmer, a flicker of melody. It was new. No one had heard this composition before. She'd written it quietly, in the mornings before school, in the evenings after the others had gone home from the music circle. She called it Sight Unseen. As the music swelled, it painted pictures with sound, the ache of loneliness, the sting of laughter, the first time her fingers found harmony. The night she stood on a stage full of strangers, the sound of the room holding its breath, the smile of a child pressing his first key, the voice of her mother reading letters aloud by the kitchen window. The music was all of it, and more. Halfway through, the melody shifted. Soft strings entered, Sophie's bow guiding the notes gently into the air, lifting them like wings. Together, piano and violin wrapped around one another, not in showmanship but in conversation. A call, a response, a reckoning, a reconciliation. 2 girls who had once stood on opposite ends of a cruel laugh, now singing with the same breath. The final movement slowed, and as the last note trembled into silence, Lena didn't rise. She let the hush settle, let it deepen. Because it was in that silence where the truth always lived. Then, softly, a child's voice. "Lena?" The spotlight shifted. Caleb walked carefully across the stage, guided by Sophie's hand. He sat beside Lena. Together they played a small duet, something gentle, familiar. A lullaby she'd written just for him, the very first week of the music circle. It had no fancy chords, no dazzling runs, just truth, just kindness, just sound that felt like home. The room wept, not because it was sad, but because it was whole. When they finished, Lena finally stood. She turned her face toward the crowd, sensing them in the heat of the lights, in the pulse of breath rising like mist from their chests. Then she stepped to the microphone. Her voice, when it came, was clear, strong, still soft, but full. "I never wanted to be the loudest," she said. "I just wanted to be heard." The room leaned in. There were days when I wondered if music would ever be enough to carry me through the noise, through the doubt, through the laughter of people who didn't understand me. But music never asked me to be anything other than honest. And so, I stayed with it, even when it hurt. A pause. Caleb reached for her hand. She smiled. And I stayed because I knew, somewhere out there, someone else needed to know it was okay to begin. She turned slightly toward the piano. To everyone who once felt invisible, I see you, even if you've never stepped on a stage, even if no one ever clapped, I see you. And I promise, your story matters. The audience rose to their feet, not all at once, but in slow waves. Teachers, students, parents, children. Even Amanda, somewhere in the third row, her eyes red but open. The applause swelled, not for spectacle but for truth, for healing, for beauty grown in silence. After the show, Lena walked out through the back entrance into the cool night air. The wind touched her cheeks like a thank you. The stars shimmered quietly above, distant and watching. Her mother joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You did it." Lena shook her head. "No, we did." From down the path came the sound of laughter. Sophie and Caleb, skipping over sidewalk cracks, their shadows long in the streetlight glow. For a moment, Lena just listened. Then, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. The pages were worn, the cover soft from time. She flipped to a fresh sheet and pressed the tip of her pencil to the paper. A new melody began to form. She didn't know the name of it yet. She didn't need to. It would come in its own time. Because the music hadn't ended. It was only just beginning. In a world obsessed with visibility, appearances, status, and social validation, Lena's journey reminds us that the most powerful vision doesn't come through our eyes, but through the heart. Her story isn't just about a blind girl who played piano. It's about a young woman who refused to let judgment define her, who transformed cruelty into compassion, and who found light in the very darkness others mocked. She faced laughter, whispers, and digital cruelty. She was underestimated, dismissed, and targeted. But Lena didn't fight back with fists or fury. She responded with music. And in doing so, she taught us a lesson the world desperately needs. That grace is louder than hate, that perseverance outshines prejudice, and that kindness, when rooted in courage, is an unstoppable force. Lena could have disappeared into the silence. She could have closed the lid of the piano and walked away, letting bitterness take root. But instead, she chose to keep playing. She chose to keep creating. And in doing so, she not only healed herself, she created a space for others to rise too. From Sophie's redemption to Caleb's first chord, from the crowded auditorium to the quiet music circle, Lena became a bridge, connecting pain to purpose, isolation to community, and fear to freedom. Her story is a call to all of us, to stop defining people by what they lack and start honoring what they carry within. We each have blind spots. We all carry scars. But within us, there are symphonies waiting to be heard, compositions born from survival, and melodies shaped by every tear we thought had no meaning. So whether you've ever been laughed at, overlooked, or told you weren't good enough, remember Lena. Remember her silence that spoke louder than 1,000 voices. Remember her song that began not with applause, but with pain. And most of all, remember this. You don't need permission to be powerful. You don't need sight to illuminate. And you don't need validation to be seen. You only need to begin.